Each time I come back to Paris, I have special feelings developing deep in me. This was the first time I could fly outside of Switzerland, first going to Brussels, then invited by the Paris Air Show in Le Bourget. This was 2011. And when you fly over these big cities, and this was the first one, and of course during the flight around the world, we flew over Shanghai, Manhattan, you get a feel about, of course, the size, but also what's needed down on Earth to keep our life functioning, to give us the energy. We all know that the way we live today has negative impacts on the environment, on the planet, on the generation of the CO2. And it's interesting to see that people talk mostly about the problem and very few about the solution. And there are solutions. Today we're able to produce electricity out of solar power plant cheaper than using fossil fuel, much cheaper. It's even cheaper if you take in account the storage technology you need to balance production and demand. But 80% of the energy consumptions we have today, and we do, comes still from fossil energy. And that's the reasons why we decided to develop Solar Impulse. What could be better than an airplane which could fly forever? You know, a different paradigm. Unlimited endurance, thanks to what? Renewable energy on one side and energy efficiency on the other side. And you can only use renewable energy if you want to fly forever. I mean, if you take fuel, you need more fuel to carry the fuel you need because it's weighty. But it also has to be incredibly energy efficient. And that's the challenge we have on our planet as well. How can we better use our resources? And the goal was to show that existing technologies can help us to solve the problem. And to be energy efficient explains why, in fact, this airplane is so big, you know, the size of a 747, and why also it's so light, the weight of a car. So when we had this idea with my partner Bertrand, in fact, the first reaction we had was to go to the aviation industry and ask them, can you build this airplane? And very quickly the answer came back, impossible. We don't have the technology. It's interesting to see if you look at the world of aviation, if you look the first 60 years or 50 years, 1903, the first flight of the Wright brothers, 1955, about the 50s, the 707, a 4-jet engine aircraft. And now let's compare this airplane with what we use today. For example, an Airbus 340, 4-engine as well. I don't see much difference. Mostly optimization, mostly improvement, but no big breakthrough. And as we were convinced that there was a solution, we decided to do the project ourselves. Start to bring people in. But not only engineers from the aeronautic industry, because they did not have the solution, from different domains, materials, electronics, electric propulsion. And I ended up suddenly by having a diverse group of people with very different backgrounds, very different way of treating problems, but we didn't have the right culture to do something innovative. And let me go and take you through an example. I knew that this airplane had to be built in carbon fibers, materials which, of course, is very light, can make the part very stiff, and of course, very solid. So I looked for the company, or I thought the best company could help us to achieve this goal. And here you see the skeleton of the first airplane. And the company I found, and I thought was going to be the best, was a company in boat building. No experience in building airplanes, but maybe with the right mindset, very innovative. But when I organized the first meeting with my engineers, it was very interesting to see how communication developed. After 2 hours, my people came back to me and said, Andre, you're crazy. I mean, these guys, they have no understanding of what we are doing. It will never work. I talked to them, to their technician, and said, yeah, your engineers are great, but they don't know how to use this material. You never will get the benefit of what we can do in our factory. So I started to build up small projects, test parts, trying to create the bridge between these people. It took me 2 years to get the respect, to get the communication going. It was not about technology. It was about bringing the right culture. You know, when you have people of very different backgrounds and you bring them together, you will see that everyone is trying to demonstrate that his vision of the world is the best one. But no one is really listening to the other one. And that's your task. And that's your task as an entrepreneur. So I guess, in fact, why were they attracted by the project? Maybe because they didn't know it was impossible. You know, unlike the aviation industry. And in my experience, I found that sometimes it's more difficult to de-learn when you have a lot of expertise. You are involved in different startups. Some of you are very young, so you have, I think, the great advantage of not being surrounded by what you have learned. But other people do not have this advantage. And I like this experiment. That's a bicycle which has a steering system which turns in the opposite direction than the front wheel. And let's see what this gentleman does. So if you can have the sound of the presentation, please. On the back. So this gentleman explains, in fact, that they wanted to see how the brain reacts when facing a situation completely different than the one we're used at. So that's the gentleman who did it. So he's trying, and you can see that it's pretty hard. So what he says is that what he learned is not, of course, useful, but it's a big barrier. And he is adding that you may think he's not coordinated, but he is. So it was not a question of coordination. It was a question of how to use your brain. And if you look at different industries, and let's go back to the aviation industry, it's interesting to see that it took 30 years from the moment we had the first part of an airliner built with carbon fibers until we could build, for example, the fuselage. 30 years of development. So a lot of people will say, yes, that's normal because we needed to be sure that it works, that it's safe enough. That's true. But this you can achieve maybe in 5, maybe in 10 years. But 30 years is a change of generation. We had the need, in fact, to bring people who are able to work with carbon fibers, which is very different than working with metals. Metals have properties which are the same in any direction. Carbon fibers, of course, have great properties along the fiber, but very poor perpendicular to this fiber. So the design of the airplane had to be completely different. So after a few years, we did the flight around the world. And of course, I could talk about the past, about what we experienced there. I have a lot of anecdotes, but I thought that you would be more interested that we talk a little about the future. What can come next after this airplane? So the success of the flight around the world was not the end of the project. In some ways, it was almost the beginning. It gave us the credibility to continue. And we continue in 2 directions. The first one is to use this airplane as an ambassador for what we call clean technologies. A lot of partners were involved in designing this airplane. Let's take Solvay as an example. With Solvay, a chemical company, we worked on 50 different projects to try to improve the functionality of this airplane, make it lighter. From these 15 projects, 15 were introduced, 1.5, into this airplane. For example, lighter batteries, lighter electrolyte, moving from metallic part to plastic parts, all applications which found their way now through a lot of different domains. And that's what Solar Impulse Foundation is doing, promoting this huge number of technologies we have available to make our world more efficient. And I continue in the world of technology. It's interesting to see that a few years ago when we did the first flight, this was the first flea hop we did in 2009. Huge emotions. But at the time, people were saying, it's great. I mean, electric propulsion is fantastic. Think it's electric before being solar, but has no future. And today, we know that electric propulsion will revolutionize aviation. Who believes that? Who believes that electric propulsion will transform aviation here? Not bad, huh? About half of the group. Did you see this airplane already in one of the videos that you can find on YouTube? It's called the Black Fly. It's full electric. There's no moving part. Huh? The wings are stable. Only the propellers are turning. Simply rotates on the belly to be able to lift off vertically. One person, for the time being, inside. You don't need to be a pilot. It flies like a helicopter, but you don't need to be a pilot. The guy inside never flew any airplane in his life. You know the minimum age in the United States is required to be in such an airplane? 5 years old. They will have to change the legislation. It's in the ultralight. So we can see, in fact, technology is coming. Now it's the question, of course, how it's going to be implemented. And it's coming, why? Because simply, in fact, this electric propulsion, you look at drones, allow you not only to propel the airplane, but to stabilize it. A drone of few hundred francs is more stable than an expensive helicopter. Of course, it's clean, it's quiet. We need to address these questions for the future of aviation. Much less parts in the system, so you can see immediately it's going to be more economical, less maintenance, longer service life. It's very efficient. The efficiency of the motor we had at Solar Impulse was 97%. A combustion engine, 2 liters out of 3 you put in the tank is lost in heat. But above all, you can come up with new designs. Look at this distributed propulsion. You don't need flight controls to fly anymore. You do it just with the motors. So you can, again, in fact, by using your mind, come up with completely different solutions. You tell me batteries not good enough? I guess so, yes, for long range, but a lot of application can be done. We don't expect a major breakthrough in the next 5 years, but it's sufficient already to do a lot of things. The good news is that the cost is going down, thanks to the automobile industry. And what you can expect is to see the development of the aviation, of the electric aviation in different phases. Simply first, existing airplane. We will fly next month an airplane which will be used for the training of pilot. Electric, quiet, non-polluting, something which does only takeoff and landing. That's now. In a few years, you will have, that's the second picture, this so-called flying taxi, urban transportation, and maybe in 10 years, transportation, I would say medium endurance, Paris, Munich, for example, with a different design as the one you can see today. But the most attractive for me is the urban transportation opportunity. 60% of us live in cities. If we can have this type of vehicles part of the urban mobility, maybe integrated in different concepts on the ground as well, non-polluting, electric, you can immediately see how we can transform our urban life. It gives Uber, of course, and people like Airbus the possibility to dream. We don't talk about hundreds of these. We don't talk about thousands of these. We talk about 100,000. So we go towards concepts developed for the car industry. But how can we do this? It's interesting to see that technology allows us to do this today. These technologies are converging. Can be new materials for weight saving. It can be computing power for artificial intelligence, which will lead to autonomous flight. Of course, we need sensors, we need cameras, becoming also cheaper. So all this, in fact, allow us to start to, to believe that this future is possible. But what's important, what's blocking, in fact, the development of this technology? It's the human being. It's our capability to adapt, our capability to accept, the speed at which we can change the legislation. So it's not so much the technology which is slowing us down, it's our mindset. And as an entrepreneur, I think that's a very, very important dimension to take into account. You can be and you will be potentially too early in the markets that you address. And what you have to is to face, approach, solve, in fact, these questions about the mind of your customer, the mind of the legislator. So I would like to leave you with these thoughts and reflection. You know, we are very focused on the technology, but the human dimension makes it happen, will make it happen. Good luck to all of you. Thank you.